Good morning, everybody. It's a great honor. It's a great honor to be here in Peru. That's the last of my Donald Trump impersonations. They're not very good. It's wonderful to be here in Perugia. We're about to talk about, the title of this talk is Trump, the Kremlin Candidate, question mark. The question mark's there for a reason. I work for the BBC, but I'm not here today on behalf of the BBC, if you understand. With me is Andrei Soldatov. He's a wonderful Russian journalist, and he's written a brilliant book called Red Web. It's got an incredibly long subtitle, which I've got to read out. The struggle between Russia's digital dictators and the new online revolutionaries. Donald Trump called me lousy, thick, and disgusting. As a BBC reporter, I am under an obligation to be impartial, and I think it's perfectly fair, him having called me lousy, thick, and disgusting, to call him lousy, thick, and disgusting. He's certainly a very strange man. He took me, I've met him 4 times. The first time was in 2012. And I interviewed him for a film we made about Mitt Romney's candidacy for the presidency, which we called The Mormon Candidate. Trump was boring and said nothing of interest, so we didn't run the interview. That was 2012. Can you imagine that? 2013, I'm sent by BBC Panorama to do a film about the crazy Scottish golf course he's built and the antagonisms, the ways he antagonized his neighbours in Scotland, some of whom said that they had been their lives had been made pretty unpleasant by Trump's security, etc., etc. Trump greeted me, and in Bedminster, where this is the New Jersey golf course where he's based, and he gave me a ride in his golf buggy, and it was completely bonkers and absurd to think that this man is now the President of the United States. We're going to show 3 clips from this film. So the first clip, if you could show that now, is of Donald Trump and I in the golf buggy. Meet Felix Sater, a Russian-American gangster. Before becoming a senior advisor to Donald Trump in New York, he'd been to prison for stabbing a man in the face. He'd also been convicted for his part in a $40 million mafia scam on Wall Street. Sater escorted Donald Trump Jr. and Ivanka around Moscow in 2006. So why would Trump want him as a partner? Back in 2013, I asked Trump about a property deal bearing the Trump name that he did with Felix Sater's company, Bayrock. Why didn't you go to Felix Sater and say, you're connected with the mafia, you're fired?
Well, first of all, we were not the developer there. That was a licensing deal.
But your name's on it, Mr. Trump.
Excuse me, but I don't know. You're telling me things that I don't even know about. I mean, you're telling me about Felix Sater. I know who he is.
But for a year, you stayed in bed with Felix Sater, and he was connected with the mafia.
Again, John, maybe you're thick, but when you have a signed contract, you can't, in this country, just break it. And by the way, John, I hate to do this, but I do have that big group of people waiting, so I have to leave.
No, hold on. One last question, please, sir.
I have to leave. Thank you.
Felix Sater told us that he is not now, nor has he ever been connected with the mob. But having a man like Sater in Trump Tower shows poor judgment. Worse, these kind of associations leave him vulnerable to being compromised. Okay, by the way, I got that completely wrong. I'm slightly hungover. I'm an honest man, I would say. That clearly isn't the golf trip. That man, Sater, is a Russian-born gangster. He went to prison for stabbing a man in the face with a broken-off stem of a margarita glass in the early 90s. Then he got involved with a mafia pump-and-dump scam in Wall Street with the Gambinos and the Genovese crime families. And he was convicted for that. And then he turned FBI informer. And then he worked at Trump Tower. Recently, he popped up on the front page of the New York Times as behind a new Ukrainian peace deal, giving eastern Ukraine to the Russians in a 50-year or 100-year lease. Felix Sater, Trump said, listen, I couldn't break with him. We subsequently found out the contract for the project Sater was involved with, and there was a bad boy clause, so Trump could have broken with Sater. Sater is fascinating because he is born in Russia, or his father, people say, is a gangster as well, and he brought money, Russian money, to the Trump organization. This is after Trump's money gets in trouble because his casinos goes bust. And after that, there are very few Western banks who are willing to work with him. By the way, Mr. Trump and Mr. Sater and the company Bayrock deny all of what I've said, but there's plenty of evidence for it. The war that Sater was trying to come up with a peace deal for is happening in the eastern Ukraine. And in 2014, I caught up with someone and challenged him. Malaysians, British, Dutch. Do you regret the killings in the Ukraine?
The main problem is that the authorities in Kiev do not want a political dialogue with the east of their country.
But what have the Russians done? In Moscow today, the line remains, Russia has done nothing wrong.
There is no Russian...
So, the third clip is of a man who the Kremlin, or who's called Putin's brain or Putin's Rasputin. My producer on the BBC. By the way, this film, The Kremlin Candidate, is on YouTube. It's called The Kremlin Candidate, Trump, the Kremlin Candidate, ? I wanted to call this guy, Alexander Dugin, who you're about to see, Putin's Rasputin. And my producer said, don't do that because everybody will think of Boney M's hit Rasputin. Do you know it?
Oh, yes.
What, can you sing it for me now?
Well, actually, Dugin is a very famous personage and very famous in Moscow. He was absolutely marginal in the 1990s for his strange ideas about... He invented a theory that we have a big struggle between, say, the Russian civilization and the West, and the idea was called, his ideology was called Euro-Asianism. He was not actually the inventor, but he promoted these things, and nobody actually paid attention in the 1990s. But all of a sudden, in the early 2000s, he got some help and support from the administration of the president and from the security services. He got a position at the Moscow State University, so he was given a position to teach students. He started, he was given lots of time on Russian pro-Kremlin and state-controlled television, and he became prominent all of a sudden. Nobody understands why, until the moment when the Crimea was annexed. And that was the moment everybody understood that this kind of ideas, that we have this big struggle between, it's not only about civilizations, it's about religions. Like some Russian generals, some people in charge of ideologies started talking about a big struggle between Russian Orthodox Church and Catholicism. And Ukraine was shown as a forepost, as a launch port of the Catholic expansion into the traditional sphere of influence of Russia. All these ideas from the maybe 18th century, maybe 19th century, but they got prominent and popular. Dugin was one of the guys who promoted these things.
Great. Can we show the next clip, please? Ambassador to the States has a handle on what's behind the New World Order. So why do people on the right admire Vladimir Putin?
I think it's a question of people who believe in nation-state democracy have some admiration for Vladimir Putin. And of course what we've had is decades of our political leaders effectively trying to get rid of nation-state democracy. So what you saw in 2016 was nation-state democracy making a comeback.
Is Russia a democracy?
Not properly, no.
Is Russia a democracy?
Not a proper democracy as we understand it, no.
Democracy is under fire in Russia. Since Putin came to power, more than 20 opposition figures and journalists have been killed. If you care about democracy, this is an important place. The Kremlin is 100 yards away, and it was here almost 2 years ago that Boris Nemtsov, the bravest and most outspoken of the leaders of the Russian opposition, was shot dead. People ask questions about Vladimir Putin's commitment to democracy.
But please be careful. And you could not teach us democracy because you're trying to impose to every people, every state, American system of values without asking. And it is absolutely racist. You are racist.
In Russia, the pro-Kremlin camp doesn't like being challenged.
We don't know.
But what happens is, if you're critical of Vladimir Putin, you may end up dead.
For example, if you are engaged in WikiLeaks, you can be murdered.
Julian Assange is dead, is he?
Not, but the people...
So hold on a second. Please, tell me about Boris Nemtsov. He was murdered 100 yards from...
By Putin? You think he was murdered by Putin?
So he was critical of Putin. Can you tell me, can you list the number of American journalists who have died under Obama?
It is completely stupid kind of conversation.
Okay, very good.
Please, I'm very nice to meet you, but I don't like to continue.
So, do you think Mr. Trump will make the world a safer place? Shortly after he walked out of our interview, Mr. Dugin posted a blog in which he accused me of making fake news. He called me a repulsive bastard, an utter cretin, and a globalist swine. Such is the language of the New World Order. In America now, you can hear the echo of Russian politics.
You are fake news. I'd like to punch him in the face, I'll tell you. Get him out. I don't know if I would have done well, but I would have been boom, boom, boom up.
I think democracy is in trouble. I think the...
So, Mr. Dugin, to be honest with you, my producer, Matthew Hill, made me do that piece to camera about Dugin called me a repulsive bastard 9 times. It was snowing. And I got it word perfect every time. And I said, why are you making me do this again? And he said, no, I just like hearing you say he called me a repulsive bastard. But to be honest with you, it felt like a threat. Dugin has got something like 20,000 followers on Facebook, and having my picture up there felt like a threat. Now, I've written a thriller about Russia under a president who isn't Vladimir Putin. It's a thriller. It's a made-up story. But I have dedicated it to 3 people who I've met, and all of whom were critical of Vladimir Putin, and all of whom were shot dead. And they are Anna Politkovskaya, shot dead on Putin's birthday, Natasha Estemirova, shot dead, and Boris Nemtsov, shot dead 100 yards from the Kremlin. Do you sometimes worry, when you are critical of the FSB and the Kremlin, what might happen to you?
Well, I've been covering the Russian secret services since 1999, and I used to work for Novaya Gazeta, and Novaya Gazeta was a newspaper.
Still is.
Anna Politkovskaya worked for, and Natasha Estemirova also worked for, and it was extremely difficult in 2006 when Anna Politkovskaya was killed. Not only because she was killed, but because it seemed then that in Moscow few people talked about her killing than in Europe. They got maybe, I remember this day when we tried to, all of us, we came to the building where she lived and tried to lay some flowers. And it was about maybe 100 people, maybe it was about 70 people. And it was rainy, and it was very depressing. And at the same day, we got news that in Paris, there was about thousands of people Gafrin in talking about Anna Politkovskaya. And that was something, that was a real message. Because you remember that Vladimir Putin said, and that was his line for all these killings, that these people are not important. He said that when Anna Politkovskaya was killed, and some of his people maintained the same line when Boris Nemtsov was killed. The same idea. These people were too unimportant. Why to bother? Why to kill them? And I think that's a very cynical approach, and that's really that makes you feel very angry, because it's not only about the feeling of insecurity. Of course, because lots of things might happen to you, and yes, we had some cases when I was interrogated, and there were some criminal investigations against me, and so these kind of things you can understand. But the lack of support from your audience, that's the thing. That's really important. And sometimes you feel that you are in some sort of emigration. Like you live in your country, but you have your audience somewhere. Like my books, which I wrote with Irina Baragan, and she's here, we wrote these books in English, and they were published first in the United States. And of course, it also provides some argument for pro-Kremlin people to attack you immediately because of all these Western conspiracy theories. I mean, anti-Western conspiracy theories that like everything you have in Russia against Putin inspired or funded or, I don't know, directed from the West. And so that's why, yes, it's a very complicated situation.
Have you ever been personally threatened?
Yeah, I got some messages, yes.
If you want to share, tell me about one message.
Well, I'm a journalist. Look, we are all taught one thing when we start. Not make you into a story, not to talk about yourself. I just don't want to talk about me. I think we have lots of journalists, and actually Novaya Gazeta lost 6 people in 16 years. And it's a problem not only for people based in Moscow. It's mostly a problem. It's actually much more difficult for journalists based in regions. That's a big problem. I mean, not only in the North Caucasus because you can get killed, but because in regions in central Russia, almost all media under control of local governance, and you can't do much actually. You cannot find a place when you can publish your stories. Well, for me, it's much more easier. If I can some sensitive story, I can try to find something in the West and try to get this published in the West. Like I had a story about Sochi surveillance, when new surveillance technologies were installed in Sochi because of the Olympics games, and we got this story on the front page of The Guardian. And of course, for the Russian journalists based in regions, it's much more difficult. And they are under immense pressure, and I think they are really brave people.
Yes. By the way, who's published your book?
Public Affairs.
Right. While we were making the Panorama, Christopher Steele's dossier was published, and there were 3 claims that essentially the Russians have got sex compromat on Trump, there is money compromat on Trump, and there is information cyber compromat on Trump, which, let's take them one at a time. The sex allegations, golden showers. Tacky, doesn't feel like Donald Trump, or does it? Am I wrong?
Well, I'm not an expert on his sexual life. The one thing
do you think it's like, okay, so cards on the table. Trump's brother was an alcoholic and died of cirrhosis of the liver. Mm-hmm. People say that Trump is a sexaholic, and there are 11 current, if I'm correct, I hope I'm correct in my facts here, there are 11 women currently seeking to sue him in the courts in the United States for sexual molestation. So, is that, sorry, somebody? Okay, so it feels like there is evidence, and for example, Sir Andrew Wood, who's a former British ambassador to Moscow, went on the Today programme, and he said that these sex court cases give some coloration to the allegations in the dossier. Do you think they're credible?
Well, I think I have issues with Trump's dossier because they take some name wrongs, they take some departments wrongs, like they said that Department K of the FSB was in charge of spying and hacking the email accounts of DNC, but actually it was not true because K department of the FSB is not in charge of these things. It's in charge of supervising financial institutions, but we have a K department in the Interior Ministry, so it looks like there was some confusion. They also have some, the authors of dossier, they had some, because it looks like it's not about one guy, it looks like there's some English language and American English in the dossier simultaneously. But I think that some of these things, some of the claims ring true for me, especially how the decision-making process is described, how things are actually run in the Kremlin, with all these informal actors, formal actors, people who are not they are not supposed to be in charge of foreign policy, but they are in the room and they define what the Kremlin should do in terms of the US election. In terms of the thing in the Moscow hotel, there's a thing which is certain. From the Soviet times, there was a special practice of the KGB. There's a special terminology for that. It's called, in Russia, it's разведка с территории. So in English, we can say intelligence gathering from the territory. What does it mean? So you have a special department inside of the KGB in charge of espionage outside of the country. All these spies in foreign embassies, etc. But also, you should have some people in the Soviet Union to spy on foreigners who come to Russia. And we have these things in every KGB regional department, just to make sure that if you have a British man in, say, Rostov or Siberia, you have some people in place to try to recruit them. And these things are, as I said, the terminology for that is intelligence gathering from the territory. And the sections inside of the KGB regional departments are called the first sections. And actually, Vladimir Putin had some experience serving in this section when he was in St. Petersburg in the 80s. So he knew about these things, he knows how to run these things. And part of the game was to try to collect some incriminating evidence against these foreigners. So try to control all hotels where the foreigners might stay, all places like bars, pubs, I don't know, these kind of things. And also, we used prostitutes to collect evidence and to collect information on foreigners. Unfortunately,
Putin calls them women of lower social standing.
Exactly. So the thing is that these things did not die with the Soviet Union. We still have this practice, we still have these things and these departments inside of the Russian Federal Security Service. So actually these things looks very probable in terms of the intelligence craft they use.
There are trying to find those. So to be fair, I know I don't live in Moscow. I have to get visas to go there. To try and stand that story up is difficult. Doesn't mean it's that is not it's true or not true. The question, so where's the evidence? Well, to try and get fixers in Moscow to work with you is becoming more and more difficult. The Russians denied bugging people. After our program went out the next day, Life.ru magazine, which people say is close to the FSB, is that right? Tell me about Life.
Life.ru is a strange combination of, say, the Sun and the very pro-Kremlin media, which is not just yellow, it's not just sensationalist, but they enjoy an extremely close access to the Russian secret services. So when you see, say, footage of foreign diplomats, it's mostly you can see this footage on the website of Life.ru, and in most cases this footage provided by the FSB. And we got it's a very long story. When we got, for example, there was a crazy story about a British diplomat. And 2009, I think, yes, it was in 2009. So he was in a hotel room and he was recorded with some prostitute. So immediately this footage found its way to the website of Live.ru. When we got, just next month, they got some strange footage of an American diplomat in Yekaterinburg. But that was a mistake, because it turned out that it was completely made up. So actually there was no prostitutes, nothing, but nevertheless this kind of thing was given to Live.ru, and they posted it online. So this website was used not only against, say, foreign diplomats, it was also used and has been used against Russian opposition. We got lots of recordings of Boris Nemtsov, you mentioned him. We had a very special moment during the Moscow protests in 2011, 2012. Just 3 days before the biggest rally, Live.ru decided to post 9 phone conversations of Boris Nemtsov, and in these conversations he was a very honest man, very sincere and very shrewd. So he spoke about his friends and about his colleagues in the opposition, and sometimes he mocked them. It was meant to be.
It was a private conversation.
Private conversations, absolutely.
Bitching about friends you like.
Absolutely.
But it's very embarrassing, and these were other leaders of the opposition.
Yeah, and the idea and the goal of this thing was just to try to disrupt the whole thing before the rally. Well, they failed, but it was a clear sign that we have this access to the FSB.
So in our documentary, we also show footage of Mikhail Kasyanov in bed with his lover. And he's a leader of the opposition, and this footage went out, and it damaged his reputation. So, good question, all journalists should ask is, who's the leader of the opposition? There's pretty much a simple answer in democracies, or who's the obvious political contender for power. Ask it in Beijing, ask it in Moscow. Ask it, if you dare, in Pyongyang. But in Russia, the leaders of the opposition, Boris Nemtsov, shot dead. I've forgotten how to pronounce the name. The guy has been poisoned twice. Yeah, Karamurza, poisoned twice. Amazingly survived. Good luck to you, sir. Who else? Kasyanov, disgraced and sex compromat. So the Russians denied that they would ever do anything like sex compromat, and did 2 programs on state TV rubbishing our film, and in that they showed the clip that we showed of Russian TV showing Kasyanov in bed with his lover. So a program dedicated to proving that the Russian state does not use sex compromat, use our footage of their sex compromat. They deny that they bug people. A conversation I had with my producer, an embarrassing conversation about a contributor to the program we didn't put in because the contributor we thought wasn't interesting enough, appeared word for word in Life.ru magazine. So I at no point contacted LifePoint. They bugged us in an article denying that they bugged us. So that's what we're dealing with. So the question is it possible that the Russians' secret police have sex compromat on Donald Trump? Yes or no?
I think it might be possible, yeah.
On the money. So the gossip in the city of London and on Wall Street is that after the casinos went bankrupt, few Western banks would deal with Donald Trump because they lost a ton of money on the casinos. Trump walked away, the banks got burnt. So from then on, this is the gossip, Trump denies it. From then on, Trump's got difficulty in getting money from the normal Western banking system. Enter Felix Sater, Russian gangster, been to prison, who is connected with people in Moscow. Is it possible that the Russians have got money compromat on Donald Trump?
Well, I think the problem is that, well, I have some issues with these things about compromise. First of all, it looks like nothing can actually harm Donald Trump. Well, he incriminated himself so many times. He said so many awful things on TV. It just doesn't work. And
I could give you a hypothetical that could hurt him.
Okay, good.
This is not about Donald Trump. Imagine a fictional president.
Okay.
I've actually written my first thriller, which is not about Putin, is called Cold, and I've just finished a second thriller for Amazon, which is called Road. It's out in August, and there's a fictional president called Gerard Drop, JD. So we're thinking about a fictional president. This is entirely hypothetical. There is no relation to reality. Mm-hmm. What if Drob got elected with a lot of votes from the anti-abortion evangelical South, mm-hmm. and who's tough on abortion and all of that? What if he had a love affair with a Russian beauty queen and he paid for her to have an abortion? Mm-hmm. If that came out, that would be damaging to the fictional President Drob, would it not?
Well, I think it's really an interesting idea, but to me, because I'm a journalist and I'm supposed to write about, say, security services, what actually is the most interesting thing is, what we actually sometimes forget, is that, look, it was a very market strange business to make money in Russia in the 1990s and the 2000s, and with Putin in power for so many years, it was always a bit of strange. And I personally, as a journalist, I was not really happy to see all these success stories of Western businessmen making money in my country and giving not a damn about what's going on with the political situation in the country. But you cannot blame them, actually, because, look, it's a very strange country with very strange rules, and you are not supposed to fight for our freedoms and our rights. It's our business as Russian citizens. But I think the problem starts in 2014. Because, look, before 2014, when you are a Western businessman and you are doing some business in Russia and you meet with people, some of them corrupt, maybe most of them, you see people like former intelligence officers in high positions in Russian oil companies or gas companies. But you have this idea that these people maybe they are not in the government, but they are more, but they are actors of the business in the government, not vice versa. It's not about the government trying to control the business. It's about the business trying to corrupt the government. And you just try to adapt to the situation and to deal with the power, with the people who have some power. But the problem starts in 2014, because that changed everything. It's not only about the annexation of Crimea. It's not only about the war in Ukraine. It's also about the internal situation. Putin completely changed the rules. Now he made sure that all these people, all these oligarchs, all these people with these amounts of money, now they serve the state. So now if you, say, meet a guy and he's in the oil company and he's a former intelligence officer, maybe KGB general, now you can be absolutely sure it's not about business. It's about the Kremlin. And if you are long enough in Russia, and, well, Trump was first time in Moscow, when? In the 80s, I think? 88. Like of course he knows all these things, and his people know these things. How the situation completely changed in 2014, and to pretend that it's all about business, that I think a big joke. And to have people like Michael Flynn boasting about his visit to the headquarters of the Russian military intelligence, well, I think it's pretty too much, and I think that's a real compromise. That's a real story, because it's not about contacts. It's about the nature of these contacts, and as I try to say, the nature of these contacts completely changed after 2014.
The third thing in the Steele dossier is information compromat, and in the film I interview a guy called who's Russian, born in Russian, but now works in America. Dmitry Alperovich, and he's a fantastic bloke. His father was a Soviet nuclear scientist, and they couldn't afford a computer, didn't have a computer at home. Dmitry, as a schoolboy, learnt computer code on paper. How clever is that? And he's the man who worked out that he believes the GRU, Russian Military Intelligence, Mr. Flint, where Colonel Flynn, General Flynn, sorry, I've under-promoted him, where they're the people who hacked the Democratic Party machine, and there's strong evidence for that. So the issue on the information compromise is, did Team Trump, were they across that they were feeding information to the Russians, which meant that they knew what was in those hacks. So, for example, a very good question to Roger Stone is, he says Podesta is down the barrel. Podesta was Hillary Clinton's campaign manager, and he predicted that emails about Podesta would appear, embarrassing emails, before they did. And the prime suspects for the hacking is Russian GRU. So how on earth did Podesta do that? Is it possible, again, we're talking hypothetically, is it possible that the Russians have got information compromise on Team Trump?
Well, I think that because actually we have two flows of evidence. One is provided by Dmitry Alperovich, and he's an extremely smart guy, and he's amazing. And you know that he decided never to go back to Moscow because he said, my Moscow is gone. So it's a very emotional thing for him. And also the second flow.
Why? For fear?
Because he thinks that, well, his Moscow, the liberal Moscow of Moscow intelligentsia, just disappeared. Well, I cannot share his convictions because I'm still there, and well, lots of my friends there, and I'm still hopeful, and I think we still can make my country democratic. But I can understand his reasons to be well, pessimistic. After 70 years of Putin in power, well, you might be pessimistic. But the second flow of evidence is provided by Trump dossier, and in both cases you see this kind of that there was some cooperation. So I think, yes, if you have some evidence about this kind of cooperations and you have names of people in charge of sharing information, that might be really important. But I'm only skeptical about the impact. Because, look, we got this story about Roger Stone for how many months? And we see no impact whatsoever. We don't see any change in the perceptions of the public, of the people who voted for Trump. They just don't give a damn about what actually happened.
I'm shocked to hear such cynicism. I want to throw this open to questions in a second. But I think we're at a very interesting point because of what happened, the horror that happened in Khan Sheikhoun a couple of days ago. I reported that for BBC Newsnight on Tuesday, and obviously from London, but we get the feed of all the images. And so I've seen people dying of nerve agent. Russian Ministry of Defense has come out and said that this was effectively an own goal, that a Syrian bomb fell on a rebel chemical weapons factory. And I've spoken to someone I know who's an expert in chemical pathology, Professor Alistair Hay, and he said this is most unlikely because to deliver the nerve agents, you put it in a bomb, the bomb breaks up in a in a particularly controlled way, so the maximum amount of nerve agent is released. If you bomb a chemical weapons factory, then the nerve agent will be just stuck there. There's a simple piece of pattern analysis. Those people who are most seriously affected by the nerve agent will be closest to the impact. And all of us can work it out without any risk. We can just look on our computers. The images are horrible, but nevertheless, you can work it out. This is strong evidence to me that the Russian state is lying. Now, Donald Trump has come out and said that the chemical attack was crossing the line, crossing many lines. So this is the first moment because the Russians are supporting Assad. Assad is easily is the prime suspect for this, no question. So this is the first moment where Trump is now no longer a candidate, he's in power, and somebody who he has been Strangely, he's been rude about everybody. He's been rude to the CIA, to the cast of a Broadway musical, to the Prime Minister of Australia. He's been rude to me. I'm not... He hasn't been rude to Vladimir Putin. Isn't that strange? Now, there is a very good reason, the horror of that nerve gas attack, whereby Mr. Trump, President Trump, would one expect to stand up to the people who perpetrated this attack. Do you think that's going to happen?
Well, I think that it's about two things. First, yes, it looks like, well, we try to see some strategy in the Kremlin. So we believe, especially now in 2017, that there was some strategy to promote Trump, to make him the president, and to try to, I don't know, to get some benefits out of it. My problem is that what I saw before suggests only tactical ideas in the Kremlin say thinking, and they might be extremely good and smart in tactics, and they might make some extremely smart tactical moves, like, well, you have Maidan things, let's grab Crimea, and that would prevent other countries in the post-Soviet area to think about changes of political regimes. But in terms of strategy, we always fail. And I think Trump's presidency is a good example of his failure in terms of strategy. Yes, we got lots of actually we got parties in Moscow celebrating Trump's victory. But actually 3 weeks passed, 3 weeks passed, and already we had some signs on the Russian TV that people in the Kremlin are quite disappointed. They do not know what to do with Trump. And I think that there might be more surprises for them, because, well, Trump is under immense pressure, and he doesn't care now so much about Russia. He doesn't need this support from Russia right now, as he maybe wanted to have back last year. So yes, I think there might be some surprises, but I'm still slightly skeptical that these bombings might be a change of the game. Because look, remember these terrible chemical attacks when Obama was president? Did it prompt Obama be tough with Russia? Well, yes, we had some claims, but he decided not to put the foot on the ground, and he decided not to escalate. Well, and I'm sorry, but I'm a bit skeptical.
Goodo, by the way, are you on Twitter?
On Twitter?
Yes.
Yes, sure.
What's your thingy? You can tell how technically aware I am.
I have 6,000 followers.
No, you're at...
Andrei Soldatov, just Andrei Soldatov.
And at Andrei Soldatov.
Yep.
I, in celebration of my love affair with the Church of Scientology, am at John Sweeney, RAW, R-O-A-R. Wow. By the way, I don't love the Church of Scientology, that's a joke. Michael Weiss, who's a brilliant journalist, said on the sex compromat issue...
American journalist. Michael Weiss, he's an American journalist. Yes.
Yes, he's a wonderful journalist, but he said on the sex compromat stuff, he said, so I wonder who's going, he said on Twitter, who's going to leak sex compromat on Trump first? Is it the Checker, which is the square brackets, the old name for the KGB, FSB? Is it the Checker or is it the CIA? It's a question it amuses me every now and then. One other thing. This is a festival about journalism. It feels never before in my life that the power and the necessity of honest journalism is more necessary now. The job you do is incredibly important. Telling honest news, supporting your stories with facts, and then challenging the people who are responsible. This is not something to be dismissed or thrown away. These are the things that hold and support democracy, and democracy across the Western world is in trouble, in part because of what the Kremlin's been up to, some people say. Good. Can we have some questions? Have we got a thing, I'm guessing. Is there a microphone?
Should be.
Is there a microphone? CCC? Yes, yes, yes. Right, very good. Come along. There's a chap here. If we to the front. So if we come along, run. And okay, you first, sir.
Yep. One question for John. Your clips are very demonstrative. It appears to me you are running some sort of personal war against Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin, which is very courageous indeed. But I wonder, is it still journalism?
Thank you very much. I would say part of the goal of the film's 30 minutes long. So what I just showed you is the kind of the most interesting bits and the challenges. But another problem is that we want to get people to watch this stuff. So in the film, you see Dmitry Alperovich say, this was the GRU, that's journalism. I interview a villager in the Ukraine who describes after the Russian shelling, or the Russian proxy shelling of his village, his wife had a stroke. That's journalism. 3.4 million people watched that film in Britain, which is a high number these days for Panorama. One the other day about Marie Le Pen got 2.1 million. So then that's a good number of ordinary people watching the TV. So that the justification for that stuff, the entertainment, if you like, is that it brings a bigger audience to the story, and it's an important story. It's a trade-off that we engage in. But you remind me of my bosses at the BBC, so thank you for that. Next question from the chap in the black T-shirt. If that's right, very good. You first, and then the...
Thank you.
Sorry.
Thank you. I spoke here yesterday on Trump. We spoke about some of these things.
What's your name?
Andrew Spanis, okay, from the United States, although I live here in Italy. I want to go back to somewhat of the question that he just asked, but also the point which Andrei mentioned of some people don't seem to care. And so I'm wondering if there are two questions. Do you feel that, and he already asked this somewhat, do you feel that this is part of an attempt to weaken or remove Donald Trump as president? I know some people hope to impeach Trump, especially on the Russian question, or at least to render him ineffective politically, which is a legitimate political goal, obviously, of some people. So do you think that that journalism, effective journalism, is part of this? And also, it seems to me that we are in a situation somewhat similar to the beginning, to before the elections, whereas we're all the things of focusing on all these terrible things about Donald Trump, but as Andrei said, he said terrible things before. He's done terrible things. People voted for him anyway, so there's obviously something else which leads people to vote for them. So will this actually be effective, or would it be more effective, this is completely hypothetical, to take the approach of actually having a debate on the policy question? That is, put the focus on, should there be a diplomatic opening towards Russia looking to find common interests or not, as opposed to having much more focus on all the terrible things he does.
Very good. If we can get the microphone to the guy there for the next question. So it's this chap there, and I'll answer. There we are. Good. That guy. Correct. Okay. So here's the problem. There's a lack of transparency. Had Donald Trump released his tax returns, then the question we've been asking, for example, about money compromat would go away. We'd know the answer. Or we know a lot of the answers. Because he hasn't declared his tax, and he's broken the custom and practice of previous United States presidents, it's odd. There's an anomaly there. So if somebody accuses me of something, I like to be able to give them a direct answer straight away. Do I drink too much? Yes. Am I a member of the Church of Scientology? No. If I'm in power, here are my tax returns. Because you want people in power and democracy to be open and honest. Trump is obscure and foggy about where his money comes from, and that's not good enough. So I don't think you have to go to your question. Is this an attempt to devalue his political message? Because the primary question is, where's your money come from? So there's a specific question, which is that apparently he's been loaned something like $350 million by Deutsche Bank. Who's guaranteeing the loan? We don't know. Now that's a problem in a democracy. So I would answer your question: is this an attempt to devalue his policies by saying there's a problem with the way he's entered the democratic process? It would be lovely. I love Russia. I did Russian at school. Russia is one of my favorite places. But these days in Moscow, I can expect to be followed and I can expect to be spied on and bugged. That happened. Some of my friends, people I really liked, have been shot dead. 3 of them, and they were all critical of Putin. It's perfectly fair, I think, for me to draw a deduction from that that scares me. That Trump is critical of everybody on the planet, apart from Vladimir Putin, is strange. He still hasn't said anything remotely personally critical. And this is a man who is abusive about everybody. It's a strange anomaly. So that's what I struggle with. Do you want to respond to the question?
Well, actually, I think it's a very good point about policy, because, look, we have a history of the Kremlin supporting people in, say, Ukraine, and these people then, they got elected and turned against the Kremlin. So sometimes they really, as I said, tactically they might be extremely smart. But look, they grabbed some parts of Ukraine, but they lost the country. I mean, Ukraine was mostly loyal to Moscow before Maidan revolution. And what we tried to achieve something, what we got. We got Crimea and we got the war and sanctions, but we lost the country. We also lost some of the Central Asian states. These people, they got really scared by what the Kremlin did in Crimea, and people in Kazakhstan, for example, they're extremely now they're scared to death. They do not know what to expect from the Kremlin. I do not believe that the Kremlin wanted to achieve this kind of effect. And I think it would be really interesting to see what might Trump do, because look, for him it might be also the game. He exploited these people, I mean, in the Kremlin. He openly called upon WikiLeaks to leak more stuff on Clinton, and well, it was a very cynical and unethical thing to do, but in terms of a real political struggle, well, you can use this kind of thing, maybe. Anyway, so I think it would be really interesting what might be the real Russian policy of the White House in, say, 2017, and I think it might have some surprises for Vladimir Putin. I think it's still. I do not believe that like Trump might start promoting democracy in Russia. Of course not. It's not for him. He was very, I think, sincere saying these things about Syria. He might say the same thing about Russia. Look, why we should care? And of course, it's a very appealing message to some people in the United States. Why we should care about all these countries with some problems about democracy. But I think it might be a big surprise for Vladimir Putin to try to find in Trump his ally in some questions in the Middle East and some other countries in Europe. And might be, yes, I think there might be some surprises.
Good. Your question.
Okay. I think the perception of the media has changed a lot and become a lot more polarized since the days of Watergate. Do you think it's still possible for a media investigation into Trump's links to Russia to have the same kind of impact that brings down a president?
Good question.
We have to wait and see. It feels like the most important story in the world right now. It feels. I can remember when I was at school when I saw that film, and I can remember it opens with the clattering of the typewriter on the page, and I still right now feel a tingle in my spine. I think that's good. I want to do that. So fingers crossed, eh? Yes, there's a question there. So.
Hi, my name's John Murphy. I'm a journalism academic from the UK. I'm a bit confused as to what the problem is here. Is the problem the fact that Trump has these skeletons in his cupboard, and I'm sure there are many of them, or is it that if those skeletons were to be dancing on stage in front of us now, it wouldn't have any effect on his power in America? Isn't that a bit scarier? And just a second point, my wife's from Russia, and she always says, if you think Putin's bad, you should see the other people who stand against him. She believes that they are a lot worse. And Russia has its own versions of Trump, does it not?
Very briefly, I think if the skeletons danced in front of us, I think President Trump's poll ratings would sink further. And so there's an interesting question: what will happen in the midterms? What will happen when he runs again? So I think, yes, he got elected. He got elected in part because, so the argument is simple, isn't it? People in the liberal elite like me, blah, 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 have misread popular feeling across the world. I have interviewed recently Geert Wilders, Alexander Dugin, Nigel Farage, and my team has interviewed Roger Stone. It feels at times like you're talking to the same person. I've also covered the Westminster Bridge terror attacks and the Bataclan. And there are times when it feels like that the Islamist fascists and the fascist fascists are doing rather well, and I'm minded, and they're talking, they feed off each other. They're entirely different things, but they feed off each other, and a line of poetry comes to mind: the best lack all conviction, and the worst are full of a passionate intensity. And trying to tell something of that story, that's very, very important. And I'm afraid to say I disagree with your wife, that Boris Nemtsov was a brilliant and funny guy. I asked him, there's not been enough laughs in this, and I'm just thinking of Boris Nemtsov's wonderful sense of humor. I asked him about the corruption in Sochi to build a ski resort. And he said, yeah, they built a road between the two, and it would have been cheaper to have lined the road with Louis Vuitton handbags because it was so corrupt. That man was a funny, wonderful, great human being. If he was in this room, he would be very, very alive, and he's been shot dead. So I disagree with your missus about that. Next, we've got time for another 10 minutes. We've got 10 minutes. 10 minutes, okay. Next question, sir. There's a guy up the front here. Excuse me, there's a guy, oh, right. The lady with the microphone has the power. And then him, please, when you're in the future. Yes, sir, your question?
Hi. Do you think the opposition strategy in the social media is really creating problems to Vladimir Putin's regime? We read in the last weeks on some newspapers that Vladimir Putin didn't understand on time what was happening on the internet, and a sort of Arab Springs effect is likely to be produced in the last years. Do you think this is correct, or it is an exaggeration by the media?
Thank you for this question about Russia. Actually, I think it's a formidable challenge for Vladimir Putin. He doesn't understand a thing about the internet. He said that the internet was invented by CIA, is still under control of the CIA. And his problems with social media is that, look, Russia has been for centuries defined by hierarchy, by vertical. So you have a guy on the top and he just gives some orders. Well, social media is not about vertical, it's about horizontal networks and connections, and nobody is in charge. And that's a very important thing for social media. The way the Kremlin tried to put the social media in Russia under control was very old-fashionable. He tried to control companies. Like we got the biggest and the most popular social media in Russia, Vkontakte, which looks like Facebook actually, but still, he decided to put this network under control when actually the owner of this and the CEO of the network was expelled from the country and replaced by a guy who is the son of the chairman of the Russian state television. It's a very old-fashionable approach, and it failed. And failed twice. It failed in Ukraine, and I think it's a great story. When we got this war in Ukraine, and of course the Russian line was to say, look, we have no Russian military presence in Ukraine. But we got lots of soldiers, Russian soldiers who are users of Vkontakte. And they, inspired by the Russian state propaganda about how it's good to go to Ukraine and kill some people, they started boasting of their exploits of Vkontakte, and they provided evidence that they actually were, and they provided all details, the number of units, the geolocation, all photographs. So if you need some evidence, hard evidence about the Russian military presence, you can get it out of Vkontakte. And last week we got a great example. We got the mass protest in Moscow, and lots of people gathered, and it was not only about Moscow, it was about 82 towns. And most of these protests were organized not by some organization, like, I don't know, some opposition party. People, they launched some accounts on Facebook, some protest groups. Yes, we got some logistical help from Navalny's people, but it's not a real party, it's just some groups of people. And they decided to go to streets and to protest. And that thing was mostly organized on Vkontakte and secondly on Facebook. So the biggest problem for Putin in social media is because it's a mobilizing thing, so you can get lots of people on the streets almost immediately, and you do not need so-called traditional organizations, trade unions, opposition parties, and these things are under control of the Kremlin for years. And the second thing, and this thing is maybe the most important thing, is social media give you space for public debate, uncensored. And I think it's a formidable challenge because we still have this public debate. We can't talk about sensitive things online, and the Kremlin doesn't know how to control these things.
Next question, you, sir.
Yeah, John, thank you. Andrei, it's more for you. My name is Andrei Soldatov. I'm from Ukraine. So you mentioned in one of your speeches here that it's really hard to target the audience in Russia, and that's why one of the reasons why you write your books in English and publish it in the US. But the question, probably for both of you, how do you want to target those specific types of audience in Russia, and what is this audience in Russia that could be that minor but very powerful I don't know, element that could really change how the things are being done and conducted in Russia? Thank you.
That's a tough question because we have Russian intelligence, most of it is on Facebook, and so you have this audience, on Facebook, but the question whether this audience might have any impact on the Russian policy, it's a tricky one, and during the Moscow protests 5 years ago, we had some rumors that some people from the Kremlin, they tried silently support the protests. But they were so scared that actually it didn't have any effect. And remember what happened next. We got Ukraine, we got Crimea, and we got lots of selective repressions. We got spy money in the country. And remember, spy money in Russia is not about spies. It was invented by the Soviet Union as a way to control the population. If you need to control the population, you do not need to have mass repressions as Stalin did. You just need to pick up some people and send them to jail for 20 years for allegedly spying for CIA or Ukraine. Now it's about Ukraine. And we got thousands of people sent to jail for espionage. And of course it had an effect on ordinary people. People are scared. And it's extremely important for, you need to have a, say, debate in Moscow. You need to rent some place to have this debate. Should be maybe a cafe, maybe a bar, and it gets so difficult to get these things. We got our book published in Russian just 2 months ago, and I'm extremely happy with that because we finally got the Russian publication. But when we try to find some place to have a, say, presentation, in bars, it's almost impossible. We got some human rights venue, and we are happy with that, but that's all.
This is a real problem. Getting, for us to get, to find people who will ask questions. Some of these questions are tricky. Can we find some Russian prostitutes? Is the story true? That process is becoming harder and harder to ask questions about, is the GRU using, for example, are they creating Krembots? Is there a Krembot factory in Russia? Where is it? Can we go there? Can we film there? What will happen to us and our fixers and our cameramen when we leave? These are serious problems which impede ordinary journalism. So it's almost, this is conversation, and I'm thinking about the question from over there as well, was about, well, what about the policy? Well, actually, there's something wrong with the process right now. Wrong, perhaps, you could say, about the way that Trump files his accounts, wrong in how there is, it seems, no effective scrutiny whatsoever of Russian power. There's a question there.
Just one thing to add about the message. Just remember one thing, that just 5-6 years ago, we used to have CNN, BBC, MSNBC on our cable. And not anymore.
It's all gone. It'd be lovely to have a question. Have we had a question from a woman? Anyway, I asked that question. And then you, sir, and then... Okay, you, sir.
Okay. I would like to have your comments on why you think Donald Trump has this open war with big media companies, maintained war, and then why does he openly support Brexit in that way?
The Brexit question's beyond my pay grade. Trump's weird. He doesn't, I mean, he's very open. I mean, people say that he phones up the American journalists and talks to them. Trump is a narcissist. He loves being in the media. And then he gets angry with the media when the media turns around. So I met him, he took me for a ride in his golf buggy, all of that. And then he kind of thinks, because we've been shown a nice time, and he's given me a ride in his golf buggy, he kind of owns me. And then I should only be respectful that I am some medieval peasant, and I owe him some feudal obeisance. I mean, is he stupid or what? I don't know. There's a wonderful book, a short book by a guy called Singer about him, which says he is a narcissist, but he has an incredible power of sniffing out other people's vulnerabilities and weaknesses and really going for them. So this is a real talent in somebody who's so self-absorbed. He can sniff your weakness and go for it.
Well, John, if I can add, I think it's worse than that. I don't think that Trump is just a crazy guy. I think, unfortunately, I think it's a part of a very smart strategy, and I think it started maybe with Nixon and definitely with Bush. The idea that big media in the United States are liberal by definition, so you need to find a way to have a direct access to your audience. It's a very important thing, because when you talk to media, it's a two-way conversation, so you might be asking some questions. When you have this direct access, and for Nixon it was cable television, so that's why he promoted this idea that cable should be given more power in the United States. For Bush it was also about, well, how to get direct access to your audience, and I know better than you, journalist in New York, what the people in the United States think. So for Trump, the idea is, now I have Twitter, so why I should care about you? And Twitter is a one-way conversation, because you are not supposed to answer the questions. You just deliver directly. And I think it's a very important thing, and he's really good at it.
Right, I think time's up. Right now, I have a dream. I'm going to leave here and then have a lovely meal and a lovely bottle of wine and feel super relaxed, because Perugia is one of perhaps the most wonderful small city on earth. Wouldn't it be nice to do an event like this in Moscow and have the same feeling that nothing bad will happen to me all afternoon? Let Moscow become Perugia. You're going to say I'm very cynical. Thank you very much. I want you now not just to thank Andrei for coming here, but let's also think of the 6 journalists on the Novaya Gazeta who've been shot or killed for doing their job. Thank you very much. Thank you.